Hello and welcome to French Connections, our weekly look at the oddities, the eccentricities of life here in France. This week, we're going to explore a concept that is central to life here for the French, laïcité. Florence Villeminot, hello.
Hi, Melissa.
Now we're exploring, first of all, the word,
That's
laïcité.
right. Now, laïcité is a really important thing in France. In fact, we're going to start off with our word du jour. It's such a central part of what being French is all about. Now, quite literally, it's translated as secularism, the separation of church and state. But France's brand of secularism is quite particular. And in my opinion, the English word secular doesn't really capture the complexity of laïcité, but it'll have to do in English. Now, laïcité is central to how France defines itself. It's actually a founding pillar of the French Republic, a value so sacred that it's enshrined in Article 1 of the French Constitution. Check it out. France is an indivisible, secular, democratic, and social republic.
To understand the word, actually, you have to understand, first of all, where it comes from.
That's right. French secularism finds its roots in the 18th century philosophy of the Enlightenment, which, of course, promoted the ideas of individual freedom and equality and ultimately led to the French Revolution of 1789 and the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen. You can see behind me here. Now, in the wake of the revolution, there were attempts to keep religion, and particularly the Catholic religion, separate from state matters. But it didn't happen overnight, of course, and it was in 1905 that laïcité, secularism, was signed into law.
Now, that 1905 law is really considered the backbone of state secularism. What precisely does it say, though, Florence?
Well, let's take a look at the law, because we talk about the law a lot, but there are aspects of it that people don't really know about. Article 1 says the Republic ensures freedom of conscience, but it's often overshadowed by Article 2, which says that the Republic does not recognize, compensate, or subsidize any religion. In fact, the state is neutral with respect to religion.
Now, how is that applied in practice?
Well, quite simply, faith is a private matter for each individual citizen, and when it comes to the state, well, I guess you could say it's a no-God zone. And this is very different from other countries like, say, the U.S., where there is officially a separation of church and state, but you have prayers in Congress. You swear on the Bible. In God we trust is the national motto, and you have none of that in France. And on top of that, state employees are expected to stay neutral with respect to religion. So civil servants, like town hall administrators, public transport workers, teachers, they're all prohibited from displaying religious symbols while on the job.
Now, that ban on religious symbols is also very closely watched in public schools here in France, where that secular law applies.
That's right. Public schools have been secular since the Jules Ferry laws of the 1880s. Now, the idea was to establish a safe zone where children are equal and free to learn regardless of their religious or social backgrounds. And for decades, religious symbols were actually tolerated in public schools. But in the 80s and in the 90s, there was a bitter public debate over the Muslim headscarf and essentially whether it challenged the very principle of secularism. In 2004, the parliament weighed in on this very bitter debate and passed a controversial law banning all conspicuous religious symbols in schools. So you can see them here: large crosses, headscarves, turbans, the Sikh turban, or the kippa, the Jewish skull cap. All these were banned in the name of laïcité. But what's interesting is more than 10 years later, Muslim students still feel like they're singled out. Let's take a listen.
You
have to go to school if you want to have a future, so you follow the rules. It's degrading. I'm being forced to remove something that I freely decided to wear.
What we should do instead is learn to live with all religious symbols, all mixed together, instead of trying to erase them.
Florence, that feeling that France's secular laws are being used to stigmatize Muslims in particular is something that's actually grown over the last few years, particularly in the wake of recent terror attacks.
That's right. Laïcité has really been at the heart of some bitter public debates since the Charlie Hebdo attacks last January. And many people are calling for a stricter application of secularism, among them actually the Prime Minister, Manuel Valls. For instance, he wants to extend the headscarf ban to universities. As you can imagine, this has raised a lot of hackles amongst the Muslim community, but even within the government. Now, critics say that this kind of state secularism is too extreme, and there have been calls for more flexibility and more tolerance with respect to religion. Let's take a listen.
Whether you like it or not, France is very multicultural, so it's to our advantage to be more lenient and open to understanding the needs of different communities, instead of becoming sectarian and pushing people to stay among themselves.
Critics of state secularism say that there's actually kind of a hypocrisy or a double standard that tends to favor France's Catholic cultural heritage. For instance, a lot of our public bank holidays actually come from our Catholic tradition.
Now, despite that criticism of the way the laws are applied, or the perception that they're applied more harshly to some rather than others, opinion polls consistently suggest that the French public is in favor of a strict application of its secular laws.
Absolutely, and those in favor of secularism argue that it's actually what allows us to live in harmony and in the end protects our freedom. Let's take a listen.
La laïcité, c'est ce qui nous permet de faire
State secularism is what enables us to all be united as a front. It's what enables us to acknowledge one another. You can be a socialist, a liberal, a conservative. We all disagree on lots of different things. There's one thing we agree on, one base we agree on. It's state secularism. And that helps us to defend ourselves against religious extremism.
So you can see laïcité is very controversial here in France and abroad, but as you said, it's something that French people are very attached to, particularly in the wake of the Charlie Hebdo attacks, because, in the last 18 months, it seems like French values are under attack, particularly laïcité. And in fact, it's interesting, there have been calls in the wake of all these terrorist attacks to add laïcité to France's national motto, to make it be liberté, égalité, fraternité, laïcité.
Thank you very much indeed. A look at that key French word and concept. And of course, you can have a look at previous editions of French Connections on our webpage. Florence has her webpage there. And you can also tweet her with any questions you might have.